Down one of the streets we saw protesters, civilians, journalists, photographers and a TV crew. We decided to see what was happening. Civilians and journalists and a group of Italians spontaneously got down on the road and engaged in a peaceful sit-down protest 100 metres from the police. Immediately the media people began to take pictures. Patrick and I decided to join the sit-down protest, as this was exactly the type of non-violent protest which we came to Italy to be part of. The atmosphere was calmer here than elsewhere, and due to the presence of the media and normal Genoese people, we thought we'd be safe. After about 10 minutes we suddenly noticed that plainclothes men with batons and helmets had come around the back of a petrol station behind the various bystanders and were sprinting behind us in order to cut us off. Initially I thought we should stay sitting down as we had done nothing wrong. However, when everyone began to run, we panicked and did the same. We ran back towards the march. The following moments are a blur as I just put my head down and ran, looking neither left or right. Within seconds I felt a massive blow to my side and fell to the ground, and noticed a large middle-aged man in front of me to the left drawing his baton. I sprinted to his side and made it past him, or so I thought. Within yards I was pummeled to the ground by someone, and within seconds there were 4 to 6 men punching, kicking and batoning me on the ground. Handcuffs were put on me and they started shouting in Italian and continued beating me. My wallet was taken out of my pocket and literally ripped open. They worked out that I was an Irish citizen through my driving licence and 3 credit cards. They continued to beat me, scream Italian at me, and one actually spat in my face. I don't speak Italian, but I attempted to impress upon these men that I was not violent, no violenza, and that I was a normal citizen, saw no business professional. But any attempt to communicate was met with further violence. They dragged me back towards the back of the riot police. I was bundled into the back of an unmarked car, and 4 men dressed in civilian clothing with batons got into the car. The car sped off and they started thumping me and batoning me, especially in the groin area. I noticed a photograph of the dead Carlo Giuliani on the inside corner of the windscreen like some sort of weird memento. The car was soon in the mountains and I began to literally fear for my life. Added to this terror, the most vicious of the 4 men pointed at the photograph of the dead man and then put his hand to my head in the shape of a gun and shouted "bang." Silence ensued among the 4 and absolute terror in me. My heart pounded violently and I began to hyperventilate. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably around 15 to 20 minutes, we arrived at a secluded building in the mountains. I was dragged out of the door. At the entrance to the building, a man purporting to be some sort of medic looked into my eyes, opened my mouth and basically looked me over. Within seconds he slapped me firmly and menacingly on the face and spoke Italian to my assailants. They pulled me roughly up the steps, still handcuffed, and into this building. It was not a police station or a prison, and I still don't know what it was or why I was taken there. Once inside the door, the particularly vicious man proceeded to beat me to my knees with punches and kicks. I was then dragged into the hall and handcuffs were removed, where I received a further beating by this individual and others dressed in police uniforms. I curled into the fetal position on the ground in order to protect my head and groin area, and the individual continued beating me and stamping on my whole body. He stamped down with great force. After a few minutes he stopped and left. In the cell I was brought into, there were 2 or 3 individuals receiving beatings from both Carabinieri and plainclothes policemen. Everywhere there was incessant shouting and screaming in Italian by Carabinieri and others at those being beaten. They shouted Italian at me, and as I don't speak Italian I couldn't understand. This made some of them angry and they thumped me once more. I then realised that they wanted me to remove my clothes as the other prisoners were doing. They forced me to strip completely and then made me stand spread-eagled against the wall naked. I felt vulnerable and absolutely terrified. The shouting continued, except this time from behind. When I turned my head around, they slapped me and indicated that I was to look at the wall by pressing my face against it. The shouting and screaming continued, as did blows to my arms, ribs, back and legs, and I never knew whether their shouts were directed at me. After a few minutes I was directed to squat to the ground. They forced me to stand up, squat down, stand up and squat down between 5 and 7 times. As I faced the wall squatting down, I was scared that something might be placed under me or inserted into my rectum. Thankfully nothing was, and after a further 2 or 3 minutes of standing facing against the wall naked, I was allowed to put my clothes back on and made to face the wall spread-eagled once again. For the next 10 or 11 hours I was made stand spread-eagled, except occasionally when I was taken to be made give fingerprints, mugshots and a high-tech computer scan of my head. I was forced to sign unknown documents without any explanation. I was taken out of the building and into an adjoining building which was like a warehouse with computers and high-tech machinery and professional-looking people, including women in laboratory white coats. I thought maybe there were some journalists or lawyers or more senior police officers in the room and once again protested my innocence. telling them how I was not a violent protester and that I was a business professional and that the police were beating me. But they ignored my pleas and the additional thumps I received for making them. I was sat down at a table opposite one of the women in white coats. She asked me if I spoke Italian. I said no. I confirmed to her who I was and asked could I contact my embassy or a lawyer. She said I couldn't and asked me to sign various documents in Italian. I asked her what did they say and she said it was not important and it would be easier if I signed. Given my state of mind, I was still hyperventilating. I decided it might be safer to sign, so I did sign this and many other documents. On the computer I saw that there was some sort of file with information on me, such as what countries I have been on holiday in and what music CDs and magazines and books I have purchased by credit card over the internet. I became completely overwhelmed, thinking that they were going to fit me up for some crime. When they looked for further handprints, I said I would give them only when I spoke to a lawyer. The policeman who I was still handcuffed to kneed me violently in the side of my leg below the hip and I collapsed on the ground in great pain. I begged again to see a lawyer. The policeman along with two others began to drag me along the floor out of the building. I shouted okay, okay, okay and told them I would continue with the process. This I did, and on completion I was taken outside and made to wash my hands of the ink. Here a different man dressed in a tie-dye t-shirt and with a goatee beard and shades and looking like a protester, as many of the men did, handcuffed me to himself and slapped his hand across my head a few times as if to show me who was boss. He then pulled me back towards the main building with the cells. On entering the building I saw the length of the corridor lined by both uniformed and non-uniformed people. He dragged me down the corridor in this fashion and nearly every, if not every second man kicked or slapped me. Given the fact that nearly all of them physically assaulted me, I realised that the place was out of control and in sheer panic started repeating over and over and over, peace, 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 in the hope that they might realise I was a normal citizen and stop beating me. I think it was around 5 or 6 p.m. and the heat was still intense. At no time were we given water, food or even allowed to go to the toilet. This state of affairs continued until around 1 a.m. The beating stopped in our cell but continued in others, as did the shouting, singing, shrieking and laughing. If we allowed our arms to sag we were shouted at, and if our arms and legs did not remain in the spread eagle position after shouting, individuals were beaten again. After many hours our muscles began to spasm and even seize up and cramp. I was physically, mentally and emotionally shattered. Close to dusk I began to hallucinate seeing faces on the floor of the cell. I also had visions of an apocalyptic future of a scene of environmental devastation and black stormtrooper military types marching through a destroyed landscape with oxygen masks. At one stage I thought I had been psychologically broken as I lost all faith in humanity, believing myself to be in a living hell where the so-called protectors of society brutalised and took pleasure in inflicting pain on their fellow innocent men. These so-called policemen were like sadistic teenagers pulling legs off flies as a form of pleasure. Absolute terror kept me conscious. Many times I thought I would collapse from exhaustion, but the fear of what might be done to me in an unconscious state made me use every bit of energy I could summon to remain conscious. The hallucinations and terrible visions continued, and how I remained sane I do not know. The frequency and intensity of the beatings began to ease somewhat, yet the fear did not. The sound of other people's terrible screams of pain was more traumatic than any beating I got, especially high-pitched shrieks of young boys or women which echoed around the building. What was as bad as the shrieks of pain was the laughter and hilarity of the Carbonari and others, who not only laughed at these screams but also actually attempted to mimic them in mock sympathy. That was the most frightening thing, leaving me to genuinely believe we may die as this place is out of control. The absolute contempt for human pain was further evidenced by their rushing around the corridor to wherever screams came from, as if to witness some sort of spectacle as entertainment and even enjoyment. The fun continued with singing of marching type songs with the name Mussolini clearly heard, and shouts of Viva il Duce or words to that effect, and general banter while loud thuds and screams of pain continued.